Ben was running through the snow again. The wind stung his face and he could barely breathe, but something felt different. There were no sounds of galloping footsteps, no howling, no crunching snow. Everything was silent, so he couldn't tell where the wolves were. Had they disappeared, or were they right at his heels, about to pounce? Afraid to look back, he kept running until he woke up in a cold sweat, out of breath, with the caveman blanket wrapped around his legs. Jamie didn't come back the next morning, and Ben didn't want to leave without thanking him and saying goodbye. Besides, he needed Jamie's help to call his aunt and uncle. He was hungry, so he got up, changed his shirt, and headed into the museum. Leaving the door unlocked, he used the bathroom, then went to the cafe and finished the remains of another sandwich, a fruit cup, and some juice he found sitting on a deserted table. Then he made his way back to the wolf diorama and stared into the glass eyes of the running wolves. Ben noticed a sign mounted to the wall near the diorama that he hadn't read yesterday. Environment of the Wolf Group, Gunflint Lake, Minnesota. This typical December winter scene is placed at the margin of Gunflint Lake. Across the lake lies Ontario. Gunflint Lake forms part of the old fur trading route extending westward from Lake Superior to Rainy Lake, which was originally selected to give the minimum number of portages. The time is midnight. The temperature has fallen well below zero. The curtain type of northern lights blazes upward from the horizon. The constellations Ursa Major, the Big Dipper, and Ursa Minor, the Little Dipper, can be recognized. Ben looked at the night sky painted on the curved wall at the back of the diorama. There it was, the Big Dipper, and in the tail of the Little Dipper, Ben could clearly see the North Star, but he'd never felt more lost in his life. Ben Ben had spent hours wandering around the museum. Then he'd returned to the secret room to wait for Jamie and unloaded his pockets, which he'd stuffed with things he'd found around the museum: a plastic dinosaur, a business card, a bobby pin, and a subway token. He was rereading Wonderstruck when Jamie finally showed up that evening. He sat down next to Ben on the fur blanket and produced a couple of sandwiches and cans of soda from his green knapsack. Ben smiled, took one of the sandwiches, and drank some soda. Jamie pulled out the notebook and wrote, "Sorry it took me so long to get back. I forgot my dad was taking me on one of his work trips." Ben nodded. While he ate, Jamie reached under one of the shelves and slid out an old blue record player. It reminded Ben of his mom's. Jamie unsnapped the latch and opened the lid. He chose a record from a nearby stack and placed it on the turntable. As he was lowering the arm onto the record, he stopped and smacked his forehead. He made a face, indicating he'd done something stupid, then pointed to Ben and then to his own ears. Ben said, "It's okay. You can listen. I'll feel the vibrations." Jamie smiled and lowered the arm. Ben placed his hand over the fabric of the speaker built into the front of the record player and felt the music, just like his mom used to do. When the record ended, Ben said, "I have to go home, Jamie. Can you tell your dad about me and ask him to call my family?" The strangest look crossed Jamie's face. "Okay," he wrote, "but first I have a surprise for you. My dad is working late tonight, so I have a few hours. Follow me." When Ben didn't move, Jamie wrote, "I promise I'll talk to my dad later." The museum had closed for the night and it was eerily still. Jamie led Ben down long hallways and through many doors, some of which he had to unlock with his set of keys. Most of the lights had been turned off, plunging everything into darkness. The beam of Jamie's flashlight lit the floor ahead of them. When they came upon a night watchman sitting and reading a book at the end of a corridor, Jamie pulled Ben around the corner and down another hallway. He opened a door marked "Electrics." Carefully, he led Ben through another door to a row of folding seats and pushed gently on his shoulders, indicating he should sit. When Ben's eyes adjusted to the darkness, he made out the dim glow from a control panel where Jamie stood. A giant object, like a mechanical insect, appeared in the center of the room. It turned and spun, and suddenly the ceiling lit up with stars. Ben gasped, "The planetarium." Jamie came and sat next to him as the sky filled with shooting stars. The projector rotated, the view changed, and the boys found themselves inside a meteor, hurtling across the sky. They flew to the moon and bounced between craters. One by one, the planets drifted into view, and soon they were out beyond the solar system, gazing down on the universe like ancient gods. Ben thought of the glow-in-the-dark stars in his room, and the Big Dipper, and the quote about the stars, and his mom. The glowing lights above him spun and swirled, tracing endless patterns against the perfect dome of the ceiling, like a million electric fireflies making constellations in the dark. When the show ended and they had been brought gently back to Earth, Jamie led Ben out into the museum again. They passed the shadow-covered elephants and the hanging blackbirds that kept watch over the museum. Ben pointed up as they paused beneath the gray silhouette of the giant whale. Around them, all the dioramas were sunk in darkness. The glass turned to mirrors in the dim light, so the boys saw their reflections as they passed. They waved their arms and made faces in the mirrors. Behind their reflections, from certain angles, the animals peered out like ghosts from the Serengeti. For a moment, Ben found it hard to imagine the museum was ever full of light and bustling with people. The building felt permanently haunted. Jamie, smiling broadly, turned on the flashlight and ushered Ben into a rickety old elevator. He slid the metal gate shut and pushed down on a long bronze handle. The elevator jerked and lowered slowly into the basement, where Jamie led Ben down another maze of hallways to large double doors peeling with a century's worth of paint. A sign on the door read "Workshop" in stenciled black letters. Below that, someone had handwritten, "Abandon all hope, ye who enter here." Inside, Jamie wandered from table to table, picking up metal tools and jars of mysterious liquids that glowed like amber. Ben stared in awe, trying to imagine what each one was for. After a few minutes, Jamie mouthed the word "more" and took Ben to a series of vast storage rooms. Ben looked around in amazement. He ran his hands across dusty old dinosaur bones, rows of little birds on wood perches, seashells, fossils, bugs, ancient clothing, spearheads, turquoise jewelry, ivory buttons, and 1,000 other fascinating things. The boys explored for a while, and then Jamie led them down a long hallway filled on one side with black metal filing cabinets, stacked 5 drawers high for as far as the eye could see. Teetering on top of the filing cabinets were piles of discarded furniture, including an old, empty card catalog, even bigger than the one in his mom's library. Ben stared down the row of filing cabinets. There had to be thousands of drawers here. He opened one and looked inside. Long hanging files with little tabs extended to the back of the drawer. Ben pulled out a piece of paper, a detailed receipt from the acquisition of a golden cup in 1913. He read it quickly and then removed an old photo of the museum. Ben noticed right away that the entrance was different. He was wondering how else the museum had changed over the years when Jamie motioned him back into the main hallway of the museum. In the darkness, they retraced their path until Ben found himself in front of the dark mirror of the wolf diorama. The electric moonlight had been turned off, and when Jamie shined the flashlight inside, 4 glittering glass eyes flashed back. When they had finally made it back to the secret room, the 2 boys sat on the caveman fur and caught their breath. "That was amazing," Ben said, shaking his head. "Thank you." Jamie's face glowed. He took another picture of Ben and handed Ben the camera. Ben took a picture of Jamie, and they laid the images next to each other on the blanket to develop. Jamie passed Ben the flashlight as he wrote a long note in the notebook, his tongue sticking out between his teeth. "I've never shown anyone a museum before. Your wolf box made me think you'd like it." Jamie paused for a moment and looked quickly at Ben. In that split second, Ben saw something in Jamie's glance, something that connected the two of them, beyond the secret room and a love for the museum. In a moment, the pen was moving again. "I don't have any friends here. No one likes the things I like. No one shares this stuff with me. Not even my dad, who's been working in the planetarium for 2 years, really knows or cares about what I do all day. Only you." Ben looked at the words, "only you," and he wanted to tell Jamie he felt the same way, but he let Jamie keep writing. "I wish my dad really cared about me." "I'm sure he does," Ben said. "Maybe he's just busy." Jamie shrugged and mouthed the word, "maybe." "Talk to him," Ben said, trying to imagine what it would be like to talk to his own dad. Instead of answering, Jamie started doodling in the notebook, drawing long dotted lines and arrows. Ben traced his finger along the lines and Jamie laughed. "Sorry. Sometimes when I'm thinking or when I'm bored, I make up games for myself. I like to draw maps." When he read this, Ben said, "I know, and you follow people around the museum, too." Jamie smiled. "I like having a place that's my own, to organize my photographs and listen to music." Ben nodded. My mom and I liked listening to music together while we were reading. She was a librarian. Was? What does she do now? Ben tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. He took the notebook and the pen and wrote about his mom and the car accident and living at his cousin's house. Oh, Jamie mouthed when he finished reading what Ben had written. I'm sorry. Ben didn't answer. Where's your dad? Jamie wrote. Ben shrugged. Are your parents divorced too? Ben shook his head. When he offered no further explanations, Jamie wrote, Are there really wolves in Gunflint Lake? Ben nodded. So, why did you do it? Do what? Ben said. Jamie pointed to Ben's suitcase and mimed running away with his fingers. It's far, isn't it? Ben looked down for a moment and took a deep breath. After the lightning hit me, I was in the hospital in Duluth for a long time. I could see the bus station from my window. Ben paused and Jamie nodded, as if encouraging him to go on. My cousin Janet owed me a favor. When she came to visit, I asked if she could bring me a book I liked and a necklace of my mom's. I also asked for clean clothes, my museum box, and money from my mom's rainy day fund so I could buy some food in the vending machines. On her next visit, she brought everything in a suitcase. Did she know you were going to? And Jamie made his fingers run again. I don't think so. She wouldn't have brought all the stuff if she did. The night I changed into my own clothes, snuck out of the hospital, and went to the bus station. I was halfway to New York before I realized I should have left a note for my family. But you still haven't said why you, and Jamie made the running motion with his fingers. Ben paused for a minute, then said, I wanted to find my father. He lives in New York? I thought he did. Ben could tell from Jamie's expression that he needed to explain more. I've never met my dad. My mom never talked about him. When I was in the hospital, I asked my aunt if she knew anything, but she said she didn't. I'd found my dad's address in my mom's things after she died. I thought she might have been planning this trip for me, and I felt like I had to come. It's strange thinking about it now. It was almost as if something came over me. One minute I had the idea to find my father, and the next minute I was on a bus to New York. Ben shook his head, still in shock that he'd actually done it. As soon as I arrived, I went to his apartment, but he doesn't live there anymore. I had one other clue, a bookmark from Kincaid's that he wrote on. I thought they might remember him. That's why I was there the day we met. I tried to tell you Kincaid's isn't. Jamie stopped writing and held the pen in midair. Ben looked from Jamie to the pen, then to the paper, unsure why Jamie was pausing. At last, the pen connected with the paper again, and he finished the sentence. Isn't open anymore. I could see that. I didn't know you were deaf then, Jamie wrote. The two boys sat for a while, looking around the secret room. It was as if they were both waiting for something to happen, but neither knew what it was. I wish I could stay here longer, but my aunt is probably worried sick. I have to go back to Gunflint Lake. Jamie shook his head. First, you have to practice signing. Ben smiled as he made an OK sign. Jamie showed Ben the letters again, and they spelled each other's names. They practiced spelling different words, and after a while, Ben was able to sign most of the alphabet. Jamie paused and picked up the notebook. My mom's coming to visit tomorrow, so I'll be away. I have to go home, Jamie. You said you'd ask your dad to help me. Jamie looked at Ben as if he were trying to figure out something. He finally wrote, I'm worried my dad will get mad at me. Why? You helped me. Isn't that a good thing? Jamie reached into his pocket and gave Ben his set of keys. Stay and explore a little longer, and we'll figure out what to do. Just be careful. Leave the door open for me. I'll see you in 2 days. Ben wrote down a number on a page in the notebook, which he handed back to Jamie. Will you call my aunt and uncle for me then? Tell them I'm okay, and they can come get me at the museum? Jamie ripped out the piece of paper and said, Sure. He reached into his bag and pulled out some sandwiches and apples for Ben. Then he pressed the notebook and pen into Ben's hand. For you. Thanks. Please don't forget to call. The next morning, Ben headed to the wolf diorama. He read the sign on the wall over and over again, trying to make sense of how his dream got here, behind the glass in the museum. He stared at the North Star. He wished that he was with his mom in her library, where everything was safe and numbered and organized by the Dewey Decimal System. Ben wished the world was organized by the Dewey Decimal System. That way you'd be able to find whatever you were looking for, like the meaning of your dream, or your dad. If only the card catalog in the hall of filing cabinets wasn't empty. Ben might have been able to look up information about the diorama. Then he remembered the receipt for the golden cup he'd found inside the filing cabinets. What else might be filed away in there? The files stretched from one end of the huge hall to the other. Each drawer had a silver handle and a little framed card indicating what was inside. Ben ran the length of the hallway until he came to the section of files for the letter D. He counted and was amazed that there were 58 different drawers, all labeled dioramas. One by one he opened them and found hanging files stuffed with papers and photographs, legal pads and notes. There seemed to be files for every single diorama in the entire museum, but nothing labeled Gunflint Lake. There were no files for wolves either. He tried Minnesota and Night before figuring out they were organized by halls. He found a little tab with the words Hall of North American Mammals typed on a small white card. He flipped past files labeled Alaska Brown Bear, Canoe Bay, Alaska Peninsula, Jaguar, Box Canyon near Guaymas, Western Sonora, Mexico, and Wapiti, Trappers Lake Basin, Horseshoe Range, Colorado. Finally, he came to Wolf, Gunflint Lake, Minnesota. There were 4 files with that title. Ben took a deep breath and opened them. In the first file, he saw beautiful photographs of birds, animals, and trees that he knew well, like black-billed cuckoos, gulls, raccoons, otters, aspen, white spruce, and birch. Most were black and white, but a few were in color. There were photos of the arching sky and the gunflint stones and wide expanses of snow. Some pictures were out of focus, and a few had arrows and circles drawn on them with a pen. On the bottom of most of the photos, it said 1965. In the second file, Ben found drawings of Gunflint Lake. There were pictures of trees and the lake he'd left behind, and every square inch of the property all around his house, as well as the sky at day and night and the phases of the moon. The drawings were done in pencil or charcoal, and the lines were swift and bold. Ben saw a sketch that he recognized immediately as the cabin on his family's property, and he shivered. The third file was filled with hundreds of sketches of wolves in every possible position. Ben marveled at the way they ran and sat and jumped across the pages. Their eyes were bright with intelligence, and he could almost feel the muscles beneath their fur. The fourth file contained legal papers, contracts, letters, receipts, charts, and tickets. A little slip of paper folded in half was wedged in the bottom of the file. He unfolded it and saw that it was a receipt. The purple ink was fading, but he could read the date, 1969. On the back was a handwritten note in black ink. Dinner tomorrow. Meet at Kincaid's, 8 p.m. Love, M. Kincaid's? M? Ben felt a faint ripple of electricity rush across the surface of his skin. Was this the same Kincaid's he'd been looking for? And was it the same M who'd written a note inside Wonderstruck? A shadow stretching across the files at the end of the hallway caught Ben's attention. Someone was coming. Ben panicked and grabbed the files. Stealing them was easier than he would have guessed. No one tried to stop him as he moved through the museum holding the precious papers. Once he was safely inside the secret room, he closed the door, placed the files on the floor, and collapsed onto the fur. He laid aside the first 3 files and opened the 4th one. Carefully, he slipped the receipt with the note about Kincaid's into his pocket. Ben continued to thumb through the rest of the file, past meaningless papers and ledgers, until a carbon copy of a letter caught his eye. It was on official-looking stationery from the museum. May 12th, 1964. Dear Mrs. Wilson, I'm writing to you as an employee of the American Museum of Natural History in New York City. I have recently agreed to undertake an exciting assignment to create a new diorama based on the flora and fauna of the Gunflint Lake region of Minnesota. My colleagues and I plan to arrive in Minneapolis sometime in October, and then we will travel by car up to the lake region, which I understand is about a 5-hour trip. Since you are the town librarian, I am reaching out to you, hoping you might be able to help us as we research all the elements needed for the creation of our diorama. We plan to spend about 2 months in Gunflint Lake to give us adequate time to understand the land and the animals. It's our sincere wish to work with you. I will be sketching and taking extensive photographs during the course of the entire trip. At the moment, we are also looking for places we can stay. Any suggestions you might have would be greatly appreciated. You can contact me at the address above. Thank you very much. Daniel Lobel, Exhibition Preparator, the American Museum of Natural History. Ben rushed through the museum until he arrived at the information desk in the entrance hall. He was sure his heart was going to come crashing through his chest. He ran to the front of the line and said breathlessly, "I'm looking for Daniel Lobel. He works here." The woman started speaking, but Ben interrupted her. "I need to find him right now. He's my dad." The woman's lips moved again. Ben thought she was asking him if he was lost. "Please, just look him up." The woman seemed worried. She glanced back at the long line of people waiting to ask her a question, then put on her glasses and pulled out a black book from one of the drawers in her desk. Stamped in white on the cover of the book were the words Museum Directory, 1976 to 1977. She flipped through the pages, brought the book closer to her face, and frowned. She then turned to Ben. Her mouth moved as she shook her head. "He's got to be there. Look him up again, please." The woman put her finger to her lips, and he knew he must have been speaking too loudly. She ran her finger down one of the pages, then turned the book toward Ben, showing him the names Liskey Catherine and Logan Michael. She tapped the names, indicating that his father's name would have been between them if he'd worked at the museum. Ben felt his whole body sag. The woman closed the book, picked up the phone, smiled in a strained way, and said something. Ben watched as she spoke into the phone, hung up, and raised one hand, indicating he should wait. Had she called someone who knew Daniel? Ben hopped from foot to foot impatiently, waiting as the woman turned to help other people in the line. He watched the minutes tick by on a clock behind her desk. At last she nodded toward someone on the other side of the room. Ben spun around. To his horror, a guard was heading toward them. The woman must have called security. Ben ran into the crowd and disappeared back into the museum. His heart raced. His thoughts spun. Even if his dad didn't work at the museum anymore, surely someone here must remember him. Using Jamie's keys, he made his way back down to the workroom where he and Jamie had explored the night before. He pushed open the door that said, "Abandon all hope, ye who enter here." Inside, two young men were hunched over their desks. A young woman in the corner poured some kind of liquid into a mold. All three of them looked up when Ben entered the room. "I'm looking for Daniel Lobel," he said. "He used to work here. He made the wolf diorama." The three workers looked at one another and shook their heads. Two of them started to speak at the same time. Ben tried to figure out what they were saying. One of the men got up and walked toward Ben. He couldn't read his lips, but he was sure he knew what he was saying. None of them knew his father. Before they could call security, Ben darted out of the room and ran as fast as he could. Soon he found himself back at the wolf diorama. Out of breath, he knelt down and stared into the wolf's eyes. They seemed to burn with secrets Ben was sure he'd never know. He put his hand up against the sheet of glass that separated him from the running wolves. He pictured them leaping toward him through the glass and swallowing him whole. Ben didn't know how long he stayed there before he finally returned to the secret room. The files lay scattered across the floor. He read through them again and noticed that all the correspondences relating to his father stopped in 1969, and he figured that must have been when he left the museum. Ben ran his hands along the cluttered shelves, searching for a good place to store the papers. For the first time, he noticed how fancy the shelves were, with all sorts of curly shapes and elaborate designs carved into the supports. Why would anyone decorate a storage room? All at once, Ben remembered the checkerboard pattern on the floor. He moved aside the caveman fur, grabbed an old piece of cloth, and rubbed away the dirt. More of the pattern appeared. It looked as if it had been painted to look like marble. Ben studied it and gazed again at the fancy shelves. The whole room started to feel oddly familiar. Ben had been in this room for a few days now, but he realized he hadn't really been looking at it. Behind the furniture piled in the corner of the room was a rectangular object about a foot taller than he was. It was covered in a tattered old piece of fabric, with huge water stains. Ben walked over and moved the furniture aside. As he pulled off the cloth, a cloud of dust rose up and he coughed. Beneath the fabric was an old wood cabinet. The front was filled with little drawers and doors, each with a small picture on it. A few broken seashells and pieces of coral were attached to the top of the cabinet. Ben couldn't stop staring at it. His skin started buzzing again as he realized what he was looking at. The shelves, the floor, the cabinet, they were all exactly the same as the illustration he'd seen in Wonderstruck. He was standing inside his father's book. Ben grabbed his copy of Wonderstruck and opened it to the illustration of the room. He looked from the picture to the cabinet and found himself staring at the broken seashells on top of the old piece of furniture. The colors and the shapes reminded him of something, and he moved closer to inspect them. The illustration showed that this crown of shells and coral had once stood very tall, with all sorts of ornate decorations at the base that were drawn too small to see clearly. There was very little left of the crown now. The dried cement still had a few shells stuck to it, though, and the indentations of other shells long lost could be seen, like tiny fossils. Ben's gaze rested on one of the indentations. Slowly, as if under water, he tucked Wonderstruck into his back pocket, picked up his museum box, and opened it. He took out the seashell turtle and found the indentation on the cabinet again. Just as he had suspected, the turtle fit perfectly, like the last piece in a mysterious puzzle he didn't quite understand. How could this be? How could a tiny seashell turtle that was part of a museum exhibition in New York City decades ago make its way halfway across the country to his house in Minnesota? Ben tried to put it all together. Did the turtle once belong to his dad? Had he given it to his mom? Is that why she had given it to Ben? What was his what had his dad been doing in this room? And why had his mom kept so many secrets? The files Ben had stolen caught his eye, and he looked around for a place to store them. He opened the cabinet. It was empty. Carefully he placed the papers inside, then lay down on the fur blanket. He only meant to rest for a moment, but before long Ben was running desperately through the snow again. Someone grabbed his foot, and Ben yelled, "Stop, Robbie!" He sat bolt upright and opened his eyes. It must have already been morning, because there in front of him was Jamie, carrying his green knapsack. What time was it? Ben shot a quick glance at the cabinet of wonders. Sitting on top was Ben's seashell turtle. As soon as he was able to think more clearly, Ben asked, "Did you call my aunt and uncle?" Jamie's eyes went wide, like a deer caught in the headlights of an oncoming car. He mouthed the words, "I forgot." Relieved, Ben said, "It's okay. I'm not ready to leave." He was still dazed from everything he'd learned. He started telling Jamie about the wolf diorama and his dad, and how no one he'd talked to remembered him. Ben got more excited as he spoke, recounting each revelation and each disappointment. Jamie just looked down and nodded absently. "Maybe your dad knows someone who remembers." Jamie picked up the notebook and pen. "He's working." Ben must have looked disappointed, because Jamie gave him a big smile, as if to cheer him up. "I have a present for you." He reached into his knapsack and pulled out a large yellow book. The cover read Dictionary of American Sign Language, edited by Noah Fabricant and Lydia Del Ono, illustrated with over 250 drawings and indexed for easy cross-referencing. Learn sign language now. To be polite, Ben opened it. He stared at the tiny pen and ink drawings of hands and arms with arrows pointing up, down, forward, and back. It looked like a book of codes. How would Ben ever learn them all? Anxiously, he flipped through the book. Midway through, he found a bookmark tucked between the pages. To his surprise, Jamie tried to grab it away. Thinking he was playing some kind of game, Ben snatched it back. Across the top it read, Kincaid Books. It looked just like the other bookmark Ben had found. It was the same striped awning, the same books, the same cat, only the address was different. Ben looked at Jamie, confused. "Is there another Kincaid's?" Jamie didn't answer. Ben stared at the bookmark. "Jamie, the bookstore still exists?" Jamie had the most incomprehensible expression on his face. Why was he acting so strange? Why wouldn't he look at Ben? And then it dawned on him. "The other night I told you I was looking for Kincaid's. You told me it was closed." Jamie said nothing. "Why didn't you tell me it had moved?" Finally, Jamie wrote, "I didn't know. I just found out yesterday." "You're lying to me." "I'm not. Tell me the truth," Ben said. Jamie's hand shook as he wrote, "It's stupid." Ben pointed to the notebook, silently commanding Jamie to write more. "I was afraid if you found your father, he'd take you away and you wouldn't come anymore. And if you didn't find him, you'd go back to Gunflint Lake and I'd never see you again." "But what did you think I was going to do? I can't live here forever." Ben saw Jamie mouth the words, I know. Then Jamie wrote, "I just wanted you to stay and be my friend." He rubbed his eyes, then stared at the floor. Was Ben supposed to comfort Jamie, to tell him it was okay that he had betrayed him? Didn't Jamie know that he wanted to be friends too? But wouldn't a true friend help him find his father? Jamie looked up, blinked a few times, and then wrote again. His face changed, and now he seemed quite determined, pressing the pen hard into the paper. And just so you know, I did try to tell you the bookstore was still open. The first day I met you, I pointed in the direction of the new store, but you didn't listen and you ran away. How was I supposed to know you were deaf?" Ben just stared at the words, as if he could no longer understand their meaning. It felt like a hole had opened up in the floor and he'd slipped through. In a daze, he took the notebook and pen, stood up, and walked to the cabinet. He grabbed a seashell turtle from its perch and stuffed it into his pocket, along with the new bookmark. Then, without looking back, he headed for the door.